Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Welcome to Ukraine Daily Report. Russian economy that has been reported for the last couple of years to be strong and stable, and only the outsiders like myself have been reporting about the deep systematic issues, suddenly doesn't look that hot at all. And if at the start of the year there were just reports that potentially things can go really bad for Russia, then now in the middle of the year, even the Russian-owned economists are reporting that situation is about to get out of control. Let's talk about that and more things today. Let's start by looking at the daily casualty rates for Russians. During the last 24 hours, they lost 1,040 personnel, 4 tanks, 4 armored fighting vehicles, 47 artillery systems, 1 MLRS system, 163 UAVs, 130 other types of vehicles. Besides those losses, Ukrainians are inflicting damage on the Russian logistics network in the Volgograd region. It has been an ongoing campaign for a while now, and this night was not an exception, and another logistics hub has been struck inside of the Volgograd region. But let's talk about the economic situation in Russia, and more specifically, what the pro-Russian economists are actually saying. The Kremlin-linked Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting released an article titled, "What do the leading indicators of systemic financial and macroeconomic risks show?" And long story short, they have outlined that key indicators shows that Russian economy is approaching critical levels, and seemingly, if nothing is changed, then recession in Russia is inevitable. Those are not the words that any economists should be and is not telling lightly. If even pro-Russian Kremlin apologists are trying to tell you that the Russian economy is heading for recession, then you should be well aware that the things are actually really bad. And despite the fact that the Russian central bank has lowered the interest rate, and some people thought of this, that the situation in Russian economy is improving, the reality is not as confident. The Russian central bank, when it was lowering the central interest rate, they have outlined the lowering of inflation. However, some of the more critical analysts have outlined that lowering of the Russian inflation rate right now is happening only because of the seasonal changes on some of the consumer goods, most notably because of the seasonal crop and a pretty good harvest this year that is reported both in Russia and Ukraine. So while the central bank has lowered the interest rate from 18 to 20, it is still being disputed whether this was done actually because the Russian economy is recovering from the high inflation, or because there is a strong political pressure on the Russian central bank, and instead it's actually a more damning evidence that the Russian economic system is more sick than anyone was expecting, that even the supposedly independent agency like a central bank goes after the political will of the government. But the worst part for them is what is outlined in the Center for the Macroeconomic Studies paper further, because they state that a transition to GDP decline will not be stopped even by a further reduction of the Russian central bank's key interest rate, which will not reverse the process already underway. Yikes. And it is even more problematic if you look at the situation with the Russian budget deficit, because there are real issues with the deficit already this year. At the start of this year, it was expected that the deficit will be more or less balanced and it will be covered by the Russian National Wealth Fund, fully exhausting the fund and putting Russia in a very peculiar situation. However, already this year has been problematic for Russia. This year, the budget deficit expectations have been already reviewed twice. At first, in the spring, it was reviewed to be 1.8 trillion rubles for the whole year. Later, it was reviewed due to the lower oil prices and sanctions putting pressure on the Russian budget to be 3.8 trillion. And now the predictions are that it will be reviewed once again, or at least it's going to go even further down. The economist Vladimir Yeremkin is expecting that the deficit could reach 9 trillion this year. And from myself, I would like to add that if we would look at how the budget deficit has been in the previous years, then I would not be surprised that we would see even further reduction after the year is over. So tripling the 3.8 trillion number is gonna be quite possible in my perspective, but this is a pure speculation. To understand the seriousness of this situation, we need to understand how much money Russia is having. And Russian right now National Wealth Fund is able to cover about 3.8 trillion rubles. So if the budget deficit will go down towards the 9 trillion deficit, then Russia will have a huge hole of almost 5 trillion rubles that it would need to cover. And to be honest, right now they're discussing various scenarios on how to do it, and none of these scenarios are actually answering the questions what to do. In the recent conversations between the Russian government officials and the public, it seems that the message is that we should all, addressing it to the Russians, be prepared to live with a higher inflation rate, essentially acknowledging that Russian government cannot really find any other solutions except for printing money, which will inevitably skyrocket the inflation rate for Russia. Russia decided to burn any and all relationships with Azerbaijan by sending a message to the Azerbaijani dictator Aliyev on the contract that was signed between the Azerbaijani SOCAR and Ukraine on the transition of Azerbaijani gas to Ukraine. They struck the logistics hub on the newly established trans-Balkan gas route, where the Azerbaijani gas would make its way to Ukraine. The repairs are now underway, but I think everyone understands that Russia is just doing another temper tantrum about this. In the meantime, Russia is taking every step to make sure that no person on earth will have any compassion to that country by creating a Ukrainian stolen children Amazon, where it is possible to find Ukrainian children for adoption by filtering them by height, weight, color of the hair, color of the eyes, and other physical characteristics. Since the start of full-scale invasion, Russia has abducted over 19,500 children from the occupied territories of Ukraine, and since the start of the war in 2014, it is estimated that over 200,000 children have been abducted by Russia. An absolute travesty, and abduction of children is a direct sign of genocide. President Zelenskyy reminds everyone why he is the president and then he has not lost any courage and makes its way to the Kharkiv front line. This is a little bit different than a lot of the visits that Zelenskyy did previously. This time he went very, very close to the position where the actual fighting is taking place. He acknowledged the bravery of the Ukrainian soldiers and awarded medals, and specifically he recognized the efforts that the medics are making to make sure to save Ukrainian soldiers' lives if they're wounded. After this visit, even the soldiers that have been critical of Zelenskyy have acknowledged that it is very brave, and it's very nice to see that the commander-in-chief and president of Ukraine is actually caring for the frontline soldiers, and he is not afraid to share the same bunker with them. Ukrainians are continuing fighting the inefficiencies in their military system, and specifically the part where coordination between units is lacking. They are now scaling up the Delta command and control system, the global awareness system for the Ukrainian armed forces. They are now introducing it to more units all across the Ukrainian armed forces, and they will be rolling out the tablets and the computers to be delivered all across the front line to make sure the coordination within and between units is scaled up. Delta is a system that allows in real time to overview the activities of the enemy or Ukrainians. It allows to see what specific actions and plans separate units are doing and how they can be coordinated with the units near to them. This is a great step forward for Ukrainian command and control. Delta has showed itself to be absolutely fantastic, specifically in a drone airspace, and it would be interesting to see how this will be reflected when Ukrainian commanders will perform some counter-offensive missions to Russians. United States has approved 2 packages to support Ukrainian efforts. Those are repair, service, and sustainment package for the M777 howitzers. Those are artillery howitzers, and it's good to see that over 107 million is now approved for Ukraine to get the repairs done on the broken ones. And additionally, additional transportation and consolidation services package of 99.5 millions have also been approved. So while US may be not supplying some of the newer weapons, it's great to see that there is an additional ongoing support for the Ukrainian armed forces. But please note that this is a sale of services, not a voluntary donation. An active service member of the US military, Taylor Adam Lee, 22 years old, of El Paso, is alleged to have transmitted technical information about the M1A2 Abrams tank to a person he believed was a Russian intelligence officer in exchange for the Russian citizenship. Lee, who had the top secret clearance with the US Army, said online that he was willing to volunteer for the Russian Federation in any way he can. And while this is potentially threatening for Ukraine, in reality, Ukrainians have actually got the older versions of the Abrams tanks. Besides that, they also got Abrams tanks that were degraded with their armor capabilities, removing all of the top secret ingredients from the Abrams tanks before delivering them to Ukraine. And more importantly, Russians have already captured Abrams tanks on the battlefield one way or another. So this is more of a question of the US security and the fact that there are army personnel inside of the US that are willing to fully cooperate with Russia. Another big convoy of the Russian tanks have been spotted in Russia, and it seems that Russia is truly running out of all of the modern tanks. This already somewhat rare sight of a tank convoy on the trains have attracted the attention that it was full of the T-62 tanks, which are pretty old. And this corresponds well with the data that has been reported by the OSINT analysts that Russia is running low on some of the newer models of the tanks and is defaulting to the older T-62s and sometimes even the T-54s. A very curious situation happened in the Belgorod region of Russia, where Ukrainians struck and destroyed one of the bridges in the region. The most curious part happened in first seconds of the video, where you can see all of the columns of the bridge have the anti-tank mines attached to that bridge. Notably, this is within the Russian Belgorod region, so this is not a territory that Ukraine is contesting anytime soon. So Russians are preparing for any kind of situation, and it seems that they are considering plans for potential Ukrainian offensive into the Belgorod region. But since then, the strike was successful and that bridge is now gone. And finally, the fantastic story for the people that care about Ukraine, a very human story, because oftentimes we forget about the community and the people are around us. In a lot of the discussions, we talk about what countries are doing, but countries consist of people, the people that care. Some months ago, Russia was able to severely damage the MIM-104 Patriot system radar, and arguably the most critical part of the whole system. It was brought back to Germany, where the industry determined that it is a total loss which can be repaired and should be written off, since it would take a few years to replace it with newly bought and built radar. But the people that care from the German Luftwaffe, by spending 16 hours from Monday to Saturday working tirelessly, they were able to repair that radar that was supposedly unrepairable for years in just a couple of months. And in July, this repaired radar has been delivered back to Ukraine and is now saving lives there in Ukraine. I cannot express it enough, just how grateful everyone in Ukraine, and myself especially, is to people that care. And if you watch this video, it is clear that you care. Thank you. Thank you for staying with Ukraine. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. Continue trusting Ukraine. Be strong. I love you. Slava Ukraini. And I will see you next time.